Greetings, and welcome to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Eye of Horus, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Essentials of Practical Alchemy, the 2016 workshop. I just finished up all the annotations and edits to the last class, and I'm really pleased at all the ground that we were able to cover in just that single point of time. So I'm sure you're going to be pleased. Again, a big thank you to Maggie and Dre for providing us such an excellent environment wherein to hold the class, and their willingness to open up their store to the world. They're wonderful people. So thank you guys, and thank all of you online who've participated and all of the wonderful support that I've received as a result of doing these workshops for you guys. So we have one more left, and then we're wrapping it up. So with that, let's get started with this particular class. It is Seeing Through the Eyes of Horus, and the purpose of this is to help you guys out there get a glimpse of the world I can see as a result of the application of alchemical principles relative to the electric universe. All right, sit back, pull out some paper and pencil, and enjoy. Welcome everyone to the Modern Alchemist channel. I'm Eye of Horus, the Modern Alchemist, and today we are here at Earth Magic to discuss Essentials in Practical Alchemy, the 2016 workshop. This is class number 6, and today we are going to be discussing Seeing Through the Eye of Horus, or the Eyes, rather, of Horus. So we've covered this material in the past in a bunch of different ways. I've discussed it in class, in previous things, and of course, the beauty of discussion on the Eye of Horus and the Eye of Re is that they are such complex cognitive thought forms that their narrative branches out into every possible aspect that you could even think about. So, with that said, let's ask the first question. The one thing that is, in fact, the elephant in the room. Why are we talking about eyeballs? Why not talk about ears or noses? I mean, the eye itself, in terms of senses, is representative of that. But why an eye? You know, in poetry we talk about the eye being the window of the soul, but what does that mean, right? What does it mean? Is it an aperture access point, or what specifically? Well, I have your answer. And the answer comes simply in reference to what the eye is in reference to. Each time that we discuss eyes, it's in reference to a star, and stars represent a generative point of consciousness, meaning that they project out electromagnetism, which, as we discussed last week, could be considered consciousness. And that projection is non-reflective, meaning that stars do not have a reflection because they're outputting, whereas planets do have a reflection, so they are receptive inputting. All right, let's take a look at the electric universe dynamic of how this works and look at the physical structure of the human eye to see what I'm talking about. And to get a better idea of where I'm drawing this information, I have a few videos from David Lapointe, who does these experimentations in the electric universe, where he has a series of magnetized cups, which have a little hole in the bottom, and then by running plasma through these cups, you can actually see the structure of electromagnetism, the structure of plasma, as influenced by the magnetic cup and its structure that it provides. Now here's a caveat regarding these videos. It seems clear to me that David Lapointe is probably trying to design an engine of sorts. And as a product of that, he actually has a couple straw man arguments set up to support that plasma doesn't function in a vacuum. And those of us in the esoteric and those of us who are plasma physicists understand that there's an additional component, an ether, which is a medium through which this electromagnetism is conducted. So it again, like everything else, it's a party of three. So we have electricity, we have magnetism, and then we have the ether, which provides it its structure. So now that we understand that, let's talk about some structure thanks to David Lapointe. And let's look at the human eye, okay, as a response to this. Head on, looking in, we have the pupil, and then here's the eye, right? We have the pupil, and this is the iris, right, which has its all little kind of interesting, fascinating structures. Structures that if you look into outer space, you can see these structures that you see in the iris, these little warps and noodles and crisscrosses of filaments. You can see these in nebula eruptions and planetary nebula. Outer space. It's really quite amazing. So the pupil itself is dark, and actually this is an aperture or access point for electromagnetism to enter in. What we rarely talk about is that, but you can see in your own eye, is that around the iris itself is like a thick dark line, and then there's an additional thick dark line usually on the very outer edge of the iris. And these represent, so here's the one thick line and here's the other. These represent boundaries, electromagnetic boundaries which expand or constrict in the presence of a heightened or reduced state of electromagnetism. So for the human eye, as it gets more stuff in, this ring contracts and it projects out more into the field of the iris. So when it seeks more electromagnetism, when it's deficient in light, then the pupil aperture opens quite wide, and that width is actually being drawn from this extra line. This inner line around the pupil is being expanded. It's pulling and pushing up into this so that it reaches out. In space, in electromagnetism, what we see is that a star, which has a huge heliospheric boundary around the outside, does so in the presence of a reduced electromagnetic ambient environment. So when we look at stars like Betelgeuse, which is this red supergiant, that outer edge of Betelgeuse is an expansion of its field so that it can draw in more light, like an eyeball. And planets are exactly the opposite. And now keep in mind that when we're talking about stars and planets, there's layers of reference that we can draw. Remember, as above, so below, and as below, so above. So when we're looking at a stellar body, oh, for goodness sake, what did I do with my thing? If you see my rag around here, oh, here it is. So if we're looking, let's say, at a solar system, right? Then the sun is positive, and then around it are planets in orbit, and these are negative receptive. Okay? And interestingly enough, atoms are set up and structured in the same way. so that the positive proton is gathered, or protons, like, are gathered in the center, and then the field around them are electrons. So it's positive in the center, negative, and energy is flowing in through this. So if you looked at it from the side, like this, let me do this drawing again, but from the side, this is a solar system as seen from the side. The sun is in the center, then the energy of that system is like a butterfly, which imitates the same energy as a planetary energy. So it's flowing down this way, and then it curves up and goes that way. Remember, we talked about planets, negative receptive on, or stellar bodies are negative receptive on the top, positive projective on the bottom. And so it moves this energy out like this. It looks like an apple, right? When two of these encounter themselves, and I'm just kind of doing a segue here to give you some stellar dynamics so that you can go back to the eyeball and say, oh yeah, I get it. When two of these objects are meeting in outer space, and they have this interaction, let's say this guy's a big one, and this guy is a little one, and this guy's got this little tiny field like this, and this guy has this really big field like that, okay? These push away from each other electromagnetically. So in electromagnetic forces, it is a pull, push. And we can see this take place in the point videos, where he drops a series of regular beads into a magnetic field, and then they swing in, and then they stop. So they're pulled into the center, and then they stop, and then they are pushed back into a point where they're electromagnetically
We'll take a look at how
balanced.
these bowl-shaped magnetic field emitters cause both magnetized and non-magnetized balls to form the amazing arrays shown here. The only thing holding these balls in position are the magnetic fields emanating from these two bowls. Could this truly be the way that atomic and molecular structures are properly explained? I believe so. Let's take a look at the forces at work in the nucleus area of these bowl-shaped magnetic fields. Shown here are ordinary non-magnetized 5mm steel balls. These bowl-shaped magnetic fields induce a magnetic field into each steel ball, which causes them to repel each other while at the same time keeping the balls structured together. So this mysterious force not only causes the steel balls to become packed tightly together, but it also keeps them apart. Then it does this while at the same time forming a geometrically balanced pattern, just as we find within atoms and molecules. Notice the vibration in all of the steel balls as each new ball is added to the nucleus area. What we see at work here is what I believe would truly be defined as the strong force. Here we see 3mm steel balls in the nucleus area of the magnetic fields. Notice how they can trade positions with the other balls in the array, but the basic geometric pattern is always maintained. Now let's take a look at how these non-magnetized steel balls form orbital patterns around these bowl-shaped magnetic field emitters. Again, notice how even in the orbital area, these magnetic fields cause the steel balls to be packed tightly together, and yet at the same time they repel each other.
So this, in stars, can have a wild amount of different shapes as well as in human bodies, but they always have the same theme. So the human eyeball, and this is more, looks like this, and then there is kind of a ring here, and then you have these ganglia that descend out, right, that go then back to the, it's a nerve system that then goes back into the visual cortex, which is in the back of your brain. So your eyeball is absorbing. The eye doesn't see anything. It's not seeing anything. It interprets nothing. It gathers electromagnetism, collects it in the back in the center of the retina, and then distributes that electromagnetic image or process of information to the visual cortex in the back of the brain. So essentially you are always imagining what the world looks like, and you're never perhaps actually ever seeing it for what it is because the eye is so limited in how much it can absorb. Well, in stellar formations and in plant formations, this is, and in LaPointe's video, what we have then is we'll have a cup like this, and with the human eye, this could be considered the optical area, the bone, that's the cup. Okay, in ancient Egypt, this would be depicted as horns, okay? So like Isis has a crown, and then she has a set of horns that come up off of it, right? Actually giving you an idea of the cup. In the center of her horns, she has a large disc, like this, and it's usually red or red-orange. It's never gold because she's not crowned with our sun, she's crowned with Saturn. She is Saturn, so she's saying, this is me. At the top of this, you'll have this little aperture opening at the very, very top, where the stuff comes into this field and then is gathered and then moves up like this, in this kind of a motion. So light is coming in and it's gathering and it's collecting. Down here, this is what is called a flip ring. And then right below it is another ring, which is the choke ring. And then, of course, right beneath that is yet another flip ring.
This animation shows a magnetic bowl. In the bottom of the bowl, we find 3 magnetic substructures. Now we will slice the bowl in order to get a better view of these magnetic substructures. I have named these magnetic substructures the confinement dome, the flip ring, and the choke ring.
So what we have then, and then this circular area here, this is a containment dome. Now we see this process everywhere in nature. Everywhere. It is everywhere. When you understand that this then and then this then can come out in nature, this, after it pulls and reflips, you get a new set of horns like this many times. And then you get a whole new containment dome underneath. So you get this hourglass presentation, and then you'll have a discharge right here at the choke ring, moving laterally. So boom, boom, and boom. Mirror dualism going on here. And in the center, this is where all the activity is. Now, in terms of stars, this pinching here, this then reduplicates itself over and over and over again. Literally, it stacks. So then this one would have another one with the horns going like that, and another containment dome, and there'd be another lateral discharge. And it just keeps stacking up and down. This then is a depiction, and how it functions, how it operates, is different. The eye operates exactly like a star. Our body operates like a planet. Now, as we talked in the previous week, everyone kind of got this? Yeah, okay. So, all right, so we talked about that stars and planets, when they operate, their planets are receptive. So, if you have, let's say this is a big star, like our sun, and it's discharging power into a receptive body down here. This body can do two things, and I call this the cactus hypothesis of planetary dynamics. And the reason for it is because I was sitting at my desk one day in meditation on this very concept, and I looked up at this cactus in my window, and here it is. Can you see this clearly on the camera at all?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about my cactus. So I'm looking at this cactus, and as you can see, the energy, both of them, we can see me good? Okay. The energy in this cactus, it moves down and through here, and we've created a field, just like what you see over there, right? Or what we saw before. So there'd be a little cup up here, and this is a little cup here, and then in the center is that plasma formation. Well, as energy is pumping into this, in this case it's just plain old sunlight, as sunlight is pumping into this, this cactus has a choice. It can either get fatter, or it can do what it chose to do, which is create all these little buds. You see all these little tiny buds that are forming? This is what I would equivocate, or make as a syllogism, as this and these little guys here, these buds, are to each other, so two stars are like this, and they birth planets from their side, just like this. And you'll notice that the structure is actually built on sacred geometric principles, where it has 8 points at the top, And if you follow any kind of stellar science, you'll notice that stars have a bunch of different eruptions that are, some are called spicules, and each of these little thorns could be seen as a spicule eruption coming off of the surface of a star. So this is the cactus hypothesis, that stars create and discharge planets when exposed to additional stuff. That's how they gain equilibrium. Then these planets can move off and do something else. Remember, as this star is being hit, there's something bigger up here that's pumping energy into it. And then this pumps energy into that. It as above, so below, and it's an infinite chain, a cycle, down, up to down, and down to up. All right, so this then is also representative of an eye, right? Its process, but as seen as its generative process. It's kind of a complicated idea. I hope you guys are getting it, but the end of this is that your eye is a physical representation of a stellar dynamic, which is a representation of an active process in consciousness. And that brings us to everything we've talked about before, but we're going to cover it again. So that any discussion then of the Eye of Horus should be seen as an electromagnetic discussion representative of the accumulation and interpretation of consciousness. There are a lot of people out there that are talking about, that the Eye of Horus or the Eye of Re is inside here. It's like the hypothalamus or whatever. And I would submit to you that for symbols to work in the esoteric, you have to be able to see them. So the originators of these symbols likely did not have an MRI or a CAT scan device where they could then do a cutting like we do today and see that part of the brain that, oh yeah, I guess it does kind of look like an eyeball. Maybe they did. I'm going to think, I'm going to err on the side of being conservative and say no, they, like everyone else, uses their eyeballs to see what's going on in nature and then interpret what's going on in nature as a process of living consciousness and then see that reflected in themselves. So, with that said, yes,
question.
We have a question.
It's about inverted image.
Okay.
It didn't say anything in particular, just about inverted image and maybe in context of...
Oh, like for instance with dualism. You guys are going to have to be a bit more specific on your questions for me to nail this down. But the inverted image then is basically... When I draw a line through here, I am imagining that in the center here is another circle, right? And that inside that is another circle that it just keeps fractally building upward and downward back in on itself. So this inverted image is actually showing you that it's just another... Maybe I'm not gathering your question quite right.
Just about the light being inverted in the brain.
Oh, that inverted image. Okay, yeah. That actually is kind of fun. That's a process of optics, and the brain is actually not showing us what's actually out there. Like, if we were to process everything, you'd see it upside down. And this is the brain self-correcting, and it does this a couple different ways. So I will address that question because it is funny. And an example of this question is simply this. The old saying, what's wrong with you? Do you have your head on backwards? And the truth is, yes. If we wanted straight lines, then in fact our head is on backwards and our eyes are upside down. That they both need to be inverted, which then makes you think about the hangman, right? Because your eyes are upside down.
Also reference that question.
Yeah. So you get that upside down thing and he's actually seeing it. The thing is here's your head, right? You're here, big smiley face, and your neck, and then your body, right? At this point, it's literally like a choke ring and a flip ring. Because at this point, the hemispheres of the brain, this one here, flips and deals with that part of the brain, and this, our body, and this one here flips and does this. So if your head was turned around so that you walked with your head facing backwards, then none of that would happen and it would just be straight down, right? So if I want to use my right arm, I'd move the right side hemisphere of my brain instead of the left, but this is kind of flipped. So I hope that answers that question. Refining it like that makes it much easier to answer it. So, Eye of Horus. Eye of Ray. Now you notice I keep saying Ray. That's because it's not raw, like R-A-W, raw, raw, raw. It's Ray. It's actually Khafre. All these different kings, their names are pronounced with and if they include the suffix it's referential to the sun, then it's Ray, like a ray of sunshine. It's not accidental that that's actually the word for the word. So, let's see. Okay, we're making good time, you guys. This is great. So, let's talk about the Eye of Horus briefly. This is the left eye. And so that you know, this is a Kabbalistic reference. And so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and do the Tree of Life briefly. We have Kether, number 1. We have Chokmah, number 2. Binah, number 3. And down here, number 4, this is Chesed. And over here is Geburah. Okay? Chesed is tied to Jupiter, and Geburah is tied to Mars. Alright? Chesed, in the Kabbalah, on the Tree of Life, is blue, and Geburah is red. There are 2 guides associated with the deity Horus in this presentation. Okay? There is Horus the Younger, which is tied and associated with the planet Jupiter and its relationship to the planet Saturn, which is interpreted as being Isis and Osiris. And then over here, Geburah is Mars, and its association is with Horus the Elder. This is the elder warrior god of Horus. And their interactions with each other and with their environment is a descriptive of some of the cosmological stuff that happened to us early in our history. And we've covered this before in a number of different contexts. This eye, then, let's take a look then at the blue eye of Horus, okay? Remember, they're both the eyes of Horus, and at one point, if you're starting with Horus the Younger, both eyes are red, because the consciousness of Horus is generated from a red star, okay? A lot of this, there's a lot that falls together when you start realizing that certain stars may or may not have switched up their color depending upon what happened in their history and what happened around them. Now let's look at this blue eye of Horus. So here's the eye. Looks like this. Got this really cool eyebrow here. Little guy in the front, which is a feather, and a little dippity-doo right there, which looks like a tongue. So this is the Eye of Horus, and it is distributed in fractional amounts. Some of you might think that the fractional amounts are arbitrary, but actually they relate to a property of electromagnetism and specifically light, which is the inverse proportional ratio. In other words, if you take the inverse ratio of a distance over space, you can then see its impact over that distance. So if you start with 1, and then you have 1/2, and then 1/4, and 1/8, and 1/16, and 1/32, as you keep moving out, the amount of presence or force is diminished correspondingly. And that's actually built into this, and it makes sense when you realize you're looking at a star, and you're looking at the way the light functions. That's just one of the things, okay? In the front then, and it's really easy to kind of figure out where all of these senses work because they're often in proximity to where you'd expect them on your face. So in the front we have 1/2, and we have 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32. Oh, sorry, I always do that wrong. Anyway, 1/32 and 1/64. Now, when talking about the Eye of Ray, which is on the right, these fractional amounts are described as a different sense. On this side, these fractional amounts can be described as a fractal relating to consciousness spiraling outward and inward, infinitely. Like it ever reduces and it ever expands. When you add all of, the way we know this is when you add all of these fractions amounts together, you get a complete amount, which is 63/64. And when you present that in simple geometry, it looks like this. Let's see, where's my cloth? There it is. So you guys got all that? I have a whole video just breaking this part down. It's pretty good. There's one that breaks the whole thing down in about 45 minutes, which discusses the whole fractions. We're just introducing you to this, but definitely you want to take a look at those later. When you take the Eye of Horus and you pull it together as a box, this box represents 1. Now, there are a lot of Egyptologists and books out there that are claiming that these master architects, the Egyptians, did not know how to resolve a fraction, and so they simply interpreted 63/64 as 1. That's just stupid. These guys, mathematical genius, astrologically, and in terms of astronomy and being able to fix where we are and what's actually happening, yeah, some serious hardcore kung fu when it comes to their math. So basic fraction being 1, not the case. So this is what 63/64 looks like. Just a sec here. So this is 1, and if we follow the fraction, and we cut that in half, this is now 1/2, right? And then if we cut this in half, this is 1/4, and if we cut that in half, it's 1/8, and if we cut this in half, that's 1/16, and if we cut that in half, 1/32, and if we cut that in half, we have 1/64 with a missing 64th. Okay, there's a missing one. And so it gives us this really cool, I'm not a super awesome artist, but this is that wonderful phi. This is phi. You're looking at that, the spiral. I probably boxed this wrong to make the spiral sue me, I don't know. Anyway, so you get this idea. Now this then gives us the reason why, for instance, horns which go like this, and then they're segmented, right? Why horns were considered an emblem of power because they represented that same process, that infinite progression of consciousness that's ever growing and expanding as a result of this improper fraction. All right, so there is that. On the other side, no questions? We're good? Sweet, you guys are awesome. All right, on the other side, let's draw the other eye. All right. So, this is the other eye, super eyebrow. Got your feather up here and your tongue. And, sorry, like that. So now this is the eye of Re. This is your eye. It's a representation of your conscious state broken up into multiple different senses. All right? So, beginning at the front, this is your sense of smell, which is it's tied, it's associated on the other side with the 1/2. Sight, which is tied to the 1/4. Hearing, and this is thought, and hearing, this is 1/16. Touching, this is touch. This hieroglyphic here is a little feather, and that's 1/32. And I'm just going to do it that way every time, it's so funny. It's 1/64. And taste is 1/32. Now, why go in this order? Well, there's a practical reason. Obviously, keeping the front part next to the nose is reminiscent of your nose. So if you're just like looking at it, you know your eyebrow is close to your brain, so thought. You get a sense of feeling, you know, you rub your face here with the little feathers, so that's touch, and your tongue sticks out, so that's taste. So there's a logical reason for these associations. Why they're distributed in association with the fractional amounts is most likely in association with which of these senses are more impactful to a cognitive state. So as we know, when we walk around all day, touch is a very limited cognitive state because we're always wearing clothes and shoes and things, and we're generally desensitized to touching things. Like our hands are really the only thing we really use to touch stuff, and these aren't super duper. As we move up, taste, those of you who follow esoteric writings, or I'm sorry, smell rather, who follow esoteric writings understand that the sense of smell is actually key to processing certain cognitive states. Aromatherapy discusses this at length, and that you can actually change your entire mood simply by smelling something. Smell is also tied directly to memory. So a certain scent will have more power at causing a recollection of a previous state or state of being than seeing it or hearing it or feeling it or tasting it. It's really quite powerful. So each of these, and I go at length in, there's a 45-minute video where I break down just this idea in a much fuller and more complete. Like I said, we could run through this all the time, but the takeaway for this one is to see the connection between stellar projected consciousness, your eye, and then your conscious state, all right? So that's the goal here today, is to help you see that these symbols are associated with those conscious states. All right, so next on the list, this fractional amount, which has a base 64, becomes super duper 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 important when we start looking at expressions of genetics. That's right, the number 64 has biological relevance to the human organism. And this can be seen by using 64 and then looking at its mirror opposite, 46. Contained within these two numbers, relative to the Eye of Horus and its progression arithmetically, these two numbers relate to the construction of your being. How do we know? Well, 46, you have 46 chromosomes within the human DNA. And of those chromosomes, there are 64 codons, which are combinations of the amino acids A, G, C, and T. So the Eye of Horus not only is a description of stellar dynamics and how stars respond in the presence or absence of electromagnetic environments, it is also a description of how we are built. Now, how do we get to this point in another way? What kind of symbolic things might also point us in this direction and make this really super exciting? Well, let's take a look at other places where the number 64 is seen. This number is seen in the I chain, where there are 64 cube-like characters. This is seen in a chessboard or checkerboard. Chess or checkerboard, where it's 8 and 8, which gives you a full playing space of 64. This is also seen, let's see, and those, the chessboard or checkerboard, where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let me do the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So now we have 64 squares. This square then becomes, itself is representative of a fractal, right? Because then you have a bunch of little squares building up, and so it just keeps moving outward, right? This is only looking at the squares in 2 dimensions. What happens if we look at a square in 3 dimensions? So top, back, down, a square presents with only 4 sides. Top, down, boom, looking straight on the top. When looking at a square from any other angle other than top down, a square will present 6 sides. 46 or 64. The cube is tied to the planet Saturn. Equals the cube. And you guys, there are like 50 million videos out there on YouTube where they're like, "Rah, the cube, look out, it's gonna get ya. Basic geometry, whoa, boogada boogada." So I usually, when I see that, I pull out these little cubes and point out that this is designed to teach children things, and it's because it's an effective tool. And because, if you follow a couple of my other videos, the cube and this 6-dimensional cube, so we'll go like this, like that. So this 3-dimensional cube, remember it's also seen like this, top down, is you can see this on the North Pole of Saturn, the negative receptive point where energy is flowing directly into it. And so that cube is on the North Pole. I have a whole video that discusses that as well. This stuff is big. This is part of the Saturn key. Because when you realize that this cube here that is embedded into all sorts of religious iconography. So in fact, I'll just leave the bottom one here. Because then you'll have, like, if you have a little cross like this, and then whatever, you get those little, that's a bad drawing. I need more art, you guys. I need more art practice. This cube, there are all sorts of ways to infer it. Like you could do a little cross in the section. You've seen flags that look like this, right? It's a reference to the cube. This here, if we take out the inside, like that, then what we have is a Star of David with 6 points, okay? You can just drop that right in there, okay? Like this. There's also that shape, which is, I'd have a whole video discussing sacred geometry. There's all sorts of, a number of different relationships with the cube. I just want to point that out, that the cube is tied to this. Now, so that's 46 and 64, right? Let's take a look at this cube again. If I make a star, boy, I am really having a hard time drawing. If I make a 8-pointed star, an 8-pointed star is basically 2 cubes sitting on top of each other. If I take 2 8-pointed stars, 8 times 8, that will again bring me back to 64. Each part of this cube then can be seen, these 2 together, can be seen as 2 parts of a same person. Okay, there's one guy, feminine, masculine on the bottom. One person, this is then another person. When they unite, we call it multiplying, right? Multiply and subdue the earth. It means you multiply these 2 numbers together, 8 times 8, and that brings you back up here to the 64. The cool thing is when you take these 2 and we're looking at the 46, and we're looking at genetic expressions, you take those 2 cubes and the 46, and you divide 46 by 2, and we have 23. 23 is the letter W in the alphabet. So here's the letter W. I'm doing that on purpose because that also can become the seal of Saturn, right? A little line through the middle. So W is also a reference to Saturn. And the 23 chromosomes are what we each share, what we bring to the table during sex. So this is also part of the Eye of Horus. It's really, really an amazing thing. It's a remarkable tool. You know, we're going to have to take a momentary break, and I'll be right back. Hey, we're back. I'm sorry, guys. I needed to take a break. I thought I was going to burst. Anyway, so here we are talking about Saturn and the cube. We've discussed it in relationship to genetics, and we've looked at how literally the Eye of Horus is a description of the building blocks of life. Literally, the building blocks of life. It gives you every possible permutation that the human being can manifest into. So let's talk then, in conclusion, let's wrap this up by talking about consciousness. Because all of this, it's all about consciousness. It's about living consciousness. That's what alchemy is about, and that's why we discussed that at length last week, that if you understand mentalism and how that plays into it, if you understand that electromagnetism is a function and feature of the transmission of consciousness, and that you can see that exhibit itself clearly in botanical structures. For instance, this whole idea, I'm going to give you a little more review here, of a flip ring and a choke ring right here. This idea you can see if you go outside and you take a look at trees, all right? And what I'm going to show you is what to look for. So you can see this actually happen, because the tree is an exhibition of all of these functions, okay? Which makes sense, because it's built, literally built on electromagnetism, and is sustained by the thing which built it. So when you look at a tree, if you're on the ground right here, right? This is the ground. Usually what happens is the tree comes up a little bit right off the ground like that. And then there's a little bitty pinch right off of, maybe an inch or two off, depends on how big the tree is. But it actually cinches down just a little bit right after it erupts from the earth, and then it pops back up again. You have to look for it, and it might not be straight. It's not going to be like this perfect straight line. It might kind of do one of these things around the tree. But you'll see it cinch down, and then the tree will come up like this, and from that cinch point, maybe like that. That's the choke ring. That's the choke ring at play. And then above it is a flip ring, and below it is a flip ring. And the way to know what they're doing is that they have opposite effects. Everything below the choke ring on a tree, or any other plant, is going to be transmitting carbon into the soil and absorbing oxygen. Anything above here on a tree is going to be transmitting oxygen and absorbing carbon. Complete flip, and it's entirely driven electromagnetically. So when we're looking at a whole tree then, and remember, the tree is like your eye. It's exactly the same. Let's say this is a big fluffy tree up here, right? And then we have the roots. And there's that little choke at the bottom, and then it comes out. Little choke at the bottom, and it comes out like that. Little choke right here, tiny little choke. This, then, could be seen as the horn, or the cup, right there. And the horn or the cup right here. And then the extent to which a tree grows this way or this way is representative of the extent to which it's expanded within that cup. All of this is an expression of a physical structure of consciousness. And the eye is built on the same concept. So, knowing this, what is the value of knowing this? Well, one, it gives you a much broader appreciation of what our ancestors knew and understood, or most likely understood. Because this didn't take a lot, well, at least for me, it seemed self-evident. It literally opened up in front of me. All I had to do was simply start doing the math and the scientific research to realize that there were correlations which were obvious, that didn't require any kind of shoehorning, like a CAT scan of someone's brain, slicing it up in little pieces. None of that is required here. And that's a testament to the application of an esoteric cognitive thought form. So, with that said, that is seeing through the eyes of Horus. It's a recognition that your conscious state is on so many levels. You know, you have the physical here. The one attribute we didn't talk about at length was thought. The fact that the eyebrow above the eye, this eyebrow here represents thought, and that means it's your sixth sense, or one of the six senses, because in understanding the process of sensory input, the Egyptians had the insight to recognize that your thinking process is identical to the processes which are observable in the physical structure of electromagnetism, which means that you receive your thinking, you don't necessarily generate your thinking. That consciousness flows through you, and that's why it's now considered a sense. It's like seeing, it's weighing, you know, in the same family as all the other five senses. That's definitely material for your next meditation. All right, that's it for everything. Oh, we have a question?
I did have one question.
Sweet.
It was in reference to thought.
Yes.
Is there a tie to wisdom, I guess, into this?
Is there a way to find wisdom? Yeah,
Yes.
okay. One thing we got to watch out for is again, you don't want to shoehorn too many different ideas into the same construct. And the reason for that is because the construct is designed to give you perspective from a particular vantage point, so that you can go, okay, if I stand right here, I can see this clearly. The idea of using wisdom, I think I know where you're going with this, right? That the right eye would be considered knowledge, right? Under Kabbalah. And then the left eye might be considered wisdom. And that is because on the left is the pillar of wisdom, or the pillar of mercy, and on the right is the pillar of severity, or the pillar of knowledge. I could see where you probably would want to do that. It's not necessarily necessary, although having knowledge fall underneath this, on this side, as associated with a pure sensory experience, it makes sense to me that you could draw that inference. And drawing an inference about wisdom, this eye here represents our link to the cosmos. That is what the Eye of Horus is. This is the change. This is the transition. We had two, which meant our entire conscious state was built on one star, which meant we may not have needed to sleep, right? Because we're transitioning. When we sleep, we move from one conscious state to another, and our life today is, if we stay in one conscious state too much, then it causes us to expire, right? We're going to die. And that is either a conscious state. If you sleep too much and never wake up, then you'll starve to death over time. And if you stay awake too much and are in the conscious state, no amount of food or water is going to sustain you when you need to go back to sleep. It's another one of these really cool dualistic flips, right? Where the conscious state that uses fuel won't be saved by fuel, but only the unconscious state, which needs the fuel to remain in that state, but actually is the balm to hurt minds, as Shakespeare says, right? The sleep, that tender gift of death, where you're able to pass away from the waking state and into a new state of consciousness or unconsciousness. I hope that answers that question. I think, maybe, hopefully. Okay, cool. So that's it for today. I'm going to be presenting Star Trek, Alchemy and Magic later this week. It's on Thursday. I'm going to try to shoot this live. Hopefully you'll be able to hear me on the live broadcast because it's a much larger room and there will probably be a lot of people in there. So with that said, I'll be talking to you soon. I'm Eye of Horus, the Modern Alchemist, and this is Essentials of Practical Alchemy, the 2016 workshop. Today, we talked about seeing through the eyes of Horus.